In the Scottish Highlands, there is a lake so deep and so dark that you cannot see your own hand 30 centimeters below the surface. It holds more fresh water than every lake in England and Wales combined. And for over 90 years, people have insisted that something enormous is living inside it. Not a fish, not a seal. Something with a long neck and a small head, rising out of the black water and then sinking away before anyone can get a clear look. A creature that, to most people who see the photographs, looks unmistakably like something out of the age of dinosaurs. So, here's the question this video is going to answer properly. Could a prehistoric reptile have survived 66 million years in a Scottish lake, hidden from an entire modern world of sonar, satellites, and smartphones? I'm going to take that idea completely seriously. We're going to look at the evidence, the sightings, the science, and the actual geology of Loch Ness itself. And by the end, you're going to know exactly what's down there and what people have really been seeing. Let's go to Scotland. To understand the mystery, you first have to understand the place. Because Loch Ness is genuinely extraordinary, and that's a large part of why this story has survived for so long. It sits in the Great Glen, an enormous geological fault line that slices diagonally across the Scottish Highlands. The loch is around 37 kilometers long, but only about 1.5 kilometers wide, a long, narrow trench of water. And it is deep, officially over 220 meters at its deepest point, with some measurements suggesting deeper trenches still. You could sink the tallest building in Scotland into it and never see the top. Then there's the water itself. Loch Ness is filled with peat washed down from the surrounding hills, which stains it a dark brown and makes it almost opaque. Divers have described going down and losing all light within a few meters. Underwater cameras struggle. Visibility is close to zero. Anything moving beneath that surface is effectively invisible. And the shape of the loch does something strange to the water. Because it's long and narrow and steep-sided, it produces standing waves and unusual wakes that can travel long distances and appear from shore as though something is swimming just below the surface. Boat wakes bounce off the steep walls and return sometimes minutes later, creating disturbances with no visible cause. So you have a vast, near-bottomless, pitch-black trench of water that regularly produces mysterious movement on its surface, surrounded by a landscape of mist and mountains. If you were going to invent the perfect place for a monster to hide, you would invent Loch Ness, which is exactly why we need to be careful. The legend is older than most people realize. The earliest account usually cited comes from the year 565 in a biography of Saint Columba, an Irish monk traveling through Pictish Scotland. The text describes him encountering locals burying a man who had been attacked by a water beast in the River Ness, and then commanding the creature to retreat when it approached one of his companions. It's a religious text written a century after the events it describes, and its purpose was to demonstrate the saint's power over nature. Historians treat it as hagiography, not reporting, but it does tell us something useful. Stories of dangerous creatures in these waters go back a very long way. For the next 1,300 years, though, there was essentially nothing. No sustained tradition of monster sightings, no stream of reports. Everything changed in 1933. That year, a new road was completed along the northern shore of the loch, clearing away trees and giving drivers, for the first time, an open and elevated view across the water. Within months, sightings began appearing in local newspapers. A couple reported seeing an enormous creature crossing the road in front of their car. Reports multiplied. The press seized on it, and the Loch Ness monster was born as a national story. And then, in April 1934, came the photograph that defined the legend forever. A grainy black and white image showing a small head on a long, slender neck rising from the water. It was credited to a respected London physician, which gave it enormous credibility, and it became known as the surgeon's photograph. For 60 years, it was the single strongest piece of evidence that something ancient was living in Loch Ness. That photograph is the reason people think of a dinosaur when they think of Nessie. So we need to talk about what actually happened with it. In 1994, the surgeon's photograph was revealed as a hoax, and the confession came from inside the group that made it. The story that emerged is this. A man named Marmaduke Wetherill had been hired by a London newspaper to find the monster. He announced he had discovered its footprints on the shore. The Natural History Museum examined the casts and determined they had been made with a hippopotamus foot, most likely from an umbrella stand or similar mounted specimen. Wetherill was publicly humiliated. According to the account given decades later by Christian Sperling, Wetherill's stepson, the group decided to get revenge on the newspaper by giving it exactly what it wanted. Sperling said he built a small model, a sculpted head and neck attached to a toy submarine, and that it was photographed on the loch. The photograph was then passed to Robert Kenneth Wilson, the physician, whose respectability would sell the image as genuine. Sperling gave this confession shortly before his death in 1993, and it was published in 1994. The single most famous piece of evidence for the Loch Ness monster was a toy submarine with a wooden neck glued to it. And once you know that, the photograph itself starts to give the game away. Look at the ripples around the object. They're small. The wave pattern is consistent with something quite compact, not with a creature several meters long. Scale in a photograph of open water is almost impossible to judge without a reference, and that ambiguity was precisely what made the image so convincing. But here's the thing. Fraudulent evidence doesn't automatically mean nothing exists. Plenty of real phenomena have attracted fake evidence. So let's set the hoaxes aside entirely and go straight to the biology. Could a prehistoric marine reptile actually be living down there? The creature everyone pictures is a plesiosaur, the long-necked marine reptiles that swam the oceans during the age of dinosaurs. Let's start with a correction that matters. Plesiosaurs were not dinosaurs. They were a separate group of marine reptiles swimming in the seas while dinosaurs walked the land. So even in the best-case scenario, Nessie wouldn't be a surviving dinosaur, but set that aside. Could a plesiosaur be down there? There are several problems, and each one is fatal on its own. Start with the lake itself. Loch Ness is young, extremely young. During the last ice age, the entire region was buried under a glacier. The loch was a solid block of ice, scoured out by the glacier's movement. It only became liquid water around 10,000 years ago when the ice retreated. A marine reptile that vanished 66 million years ago cannot have been living continuously in a body of water that was frozen solid until 10,000 years ago and did not exist in its current form before that. Then there's the biology of breathing. Plesiosaurs had lungs. They were air breathers, like whales and dolphins. A creature that must surface regularly to breathe in a narrow lake with roads and houses along its shores and thousands of visitors every year would be seen constantly and unambiguously. Not in blurry photographs, in clear, repeated, mundane sightings. Then there's the problem of one. A single animal cannot survive for millions of years. You would need a breeding population and a stable one. Biologists generally consider that you'd need dozens of individuals at minimum to avoid collapse. Dozens of large air-breathing reptiles in a lake this size for thousands of generations without a single body ever washing ashore, without a single bone, without a single unambiguous photograph. And the food problem seals it. Loch Ness is nutrient poor. Its dark, peaty water blocks sunlight, which limits the plankton that forms the base of the food chain. Studies of the loch's total fish biomass suggest it could not sustain a population of large predators anywhere near that size. There simply isn't enough to eat. Every argument so far has been reasoning from what we know, but scientists have also gone and looked, repeatedly, thoroughly, and with increasingly sophisticated technology. Sonar surveys have swept the loch since the 1960s. The most comprehensive was Operation Deep Scan in 1987, when a fleet of boats moved down the loch in a coordinated line, sweeping the water with sonar simultaneously. Effectively, a curtain of sound dragged from one end to the other. It picked up a handful of unidentified contacts at depth, which made headlines, but nothing that resolved into a large animal, and nothing that could be relocated or confirmed. Subsequent surveys have found the same: fish, debris, thermal layers, and occasional ambiguous returns, but no monster. Then came the technique that effectively closed the case. In 2018, a team led by geneticist Neil Gemmell from the University of Otago sampled water from across Loch Ness at multiple depths and locations and analyzed the environmental DNA, the genetic material every living thing constantly sheds into its surroundings. Skin cells, scales, waste, mucus. If something is living in a body of water, its DNA is in that water. You don't need to see it. You just need to find its genetic signature. The results, published in 2019, cataloged a vast amount of life in the loch. Fish, bacteria, plants, mammals from the surrounding land, birds, thousands of species. There was no reptile DNA, none. No Plesiosaur, no unknown large reptile, nothing resembling an unidentified giant animal. Gemmell did note one intriguing finding: a significant amount of eel DNA. Eels are common in the loch, and the team acknowledged the possibility, without claiming proof, that unusually large eels could account for some sightings. He was careful to say the data couldn't confirm a giant eel, only that eel DNA was abundant, so the most sensitive detection method available to modern biology swept the entire lake and found no trace of anything unknown. And if you followed the evidence with me this far, through the geology, the biology, the sonar, and the DNA, then you're the kind of person who wants the real answer rather than the comfortable one. If that's you, subscribe and stay with us, because this is exactly how we approach every mystery on this channel. Take it seriously, follow the evidence, and see where it actually leads. Now, here's the part that I think is genuinely more interesting than the monster. Because thousands of people have reported seeing something in Loch Ness. Most of them are not liars. They saw something. So what did they see? Start with the wakes. As we covered, the loch's steep, narrow shape sends boat wakes bouncing off the walls, and they can return long after the boat has gone, producing a moving disturbance on the surface with no visible cause. Then there are the animals. Seals do enter the loch from the sea. A seal surfacing repeatedly, arching its back, can look startlingly like a series of humps moving through the water. Otters swim in a line with their heads up and tails breaking the surface behind them. Large fish, including sturgeon, which can exceed several meters and have a distinctly prehistoric ridged appearance, occasionally enter freshwater systems. Deer swim across the loch, holding their heads and necks high above the water in a shape that is genuinely startling at distance. And then there's floating debris, logs from the surrounding forestry, waterlogged and drifting, occasionally rolling as gas escapes from decay. A classic explanation for objects that appear to rise, move, and sink again. Add to all of this the psychology. Loch Ness is a place people visit specifically expecting to see a monster. When you are primed to see something and you're looking at a vast dark surface at distance, ambiguous shapes resolve into the thing you're expecting. This isn't stupidity. It's how human perception works for everyone, including scientists. So let's answer the question directly. Is the Loch Ness Monster a surviving dinosaur? No, and not for one reason, but for a stack of them, each independently conclusive. Plesiosaurs weren't dinosaurs to begin with. They vanished 66 million years ago. The loch was solid ice until 10,000 years ago. An air-breathing animal that size could not hide in a narrow lake with roads along its shores. There isn't enough food. There would need to be a breeding population, and there is no body, no bone, no unambiguous image after 90 years of looking. And when the entire lake was tested for the DNA of everything living in it, there was no reptile at all. The most famous photograph was a toy submarine, and yet I don't think the story is worthless. Because look at what actually happened here. A blurry photograph launched nearly a century of investigation. It brought sonar fleets, submarines, geneticists and biologists to a Scottish lake. It produced a complete DNA inventory of an entire freshwater ecosystem, which is genuinely valuable science that nobody would have funded to answer a boring question. The monster hunt gave us real knowledge, just not the knowledge it promised. And I understand why people want it to be true. There is something in us that hopes the world still has corners we haven't catalogued. That somewhere out there, something ancient is still swimming, and we haven't ruined the mystery yet. That impulse is not foolish. It's the same impulse that sends people to dig in deserts for bones, and it has found extraordinary things. But the real prehistoric creatures are far stranger than Nessie, and we have their bones. We don't need the monster in the lake. The monsters we can prove are enough. If this changed how you see the legend, follow the channel so you can keep chasing the real answers with me. And share it with 5 people who still believe there's a Plesiosaur in that loch. Then tell me in the comments, which mystery should we investigate next? I read every single one. I'll see you in the next Lost World.